everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. Alright, I am here today with a look at the demo version of a game called Battle of the Ancients, and that is of course from Robert Lemon and Gilded Skull Games. And this game takes place in the Dark Venture universe. And you guys know how much I am a fan of Dark Venture. And so normally this style of game really wouldn't be my thing. This is a tactical strategy game. Here you can see the back of the box of the demo version. Enter a world in turmoil. Control legions of unique asymmetric creatures engaging in brutal conflict against one another. It's for 1 to 4 players. So like I was saying, normally I am not really into tactical skirmish games. They're just not my thing. There are a couple of reasons why I wanted to take a look at this game. The first being I absolutely love Robert Lemon's art and his design aesthetic. I think it is one of the boldest and most unique and evocative art styles in the board game industry today. I would have no problem putting it up there with the likes of Dungeon Degenerates in its boldness and in the way that it just sticks out, especially in the use of color. The colors just completely pop off the box and off of the printed material. Another reason why I wanted to take a look at it is because I like the world that it is set in. I think that the Dark Venture world is unique, it is interesting, and it's a world that I don't see a lot of in board games, and that's this kind of like science fantasy, almost like Gamma World style. I really like this science fantasy theming, and I find the world really interesting, and I find the inhabitants of the world to be memorable and evocative. And the third reason why I wanted to take a look at this game is because it is possible to play this game solo. So that's one thing that kind of pushes it, towards my camp more in the skirmish genre. Not only can it be played solo with an auto enemy kind of AI system, it is also going to include a number of narrative scenarios that will have you set up the game in a way that creates kind of like a puzzle. It gives you a situation that you have to work out. And so in this instance, the demo version comes with a number of scenarios. And I was looking at scenario 3, the Sarcags. So this scenario pits the Vorpin against the Bomerk. And this says here that a band of Vorpin soldiers have been chased for several hours by a pair of voracious Skarkag wolves. If you guys remember in Dark Venture, these are some of the enemies that you can hunt in Dark Venture. The Vorpin are terrified. Luckily, the 3 have discovered an abandoned building. If they can barricade the entrances to the building, they can hold off the Skarkags long enough to mutate themselves, become stronger, so that they will have the upper hand. Elsewhere, the wafting smell of something delicious awakens a hungry mass of Bomerk from the deep slumber. The smell is rancid, fetid, irresistible. The Bomerk feels vibrations from several pairs of animal paws tromping through the mud a distance away. It hears the yipping and gnashing of teeth. The meal is almost close enough to taste. So that gives you a little bit of story, gives you a little bit of a scenario that you have to work through. So the Vorpin are a faction. It says these formidable warriors are limited in number but are able to transform themselves, becoming more powerful with each mutation. The Bomerk The amorphous Bomerk resurfaced from the depths of the earth soon after the Cataclysm. So if you remember, the Cataclysm was mentioned in Dark Venture as the catastrophic event that gave birth to this strange world. They're able to split into multiple units, fuse back together with ease, and can absorb defeated enemies to grow stronger. The Bomerk have no water movement penalty. And so this demo version comes with 4 factions, and these factions are entirely asymmetrical. And this is going to be one area where I think a lot of the nuances are going to be lost on me just because of the kind of game player I am. I really don't think well in this kind of strategic realm. This is not my forte. This is out of my wheelhouse, but I'm sure if this game gets popular that people will be, debating on forums about one faction, during the first week of the game. I'm sure people will be like, oh, the Bomerk are totally OP. You need to nerf them, and the Vorpin, they're not powerful enough. You need to boost them. And then the next week it'll be the exact opposite. That people will be complaining about the opposite. And that's usually how these asymmetric games go. So hopefully, I'm hoping that Robert has given a lot of thought into how the asymmetric nature of the factions work. So the other 2 factions that you can play as are the Orpal. Orpal Gate Masters use Rift tokens to create portals, allowing them to transport their armies of aggressive, unthinking minions through space and time into this dimension. And then we have the Dargon. Tribes of Dargon are led by an elder who, after harvesting ample resources, is able to produce eggs that hatch into more of their kind. When an elder dies, another is grown to take their place. And then in the full game, there will also be a 5th faction with all of their tokens and everything you need to play the game. So there is a basic game where you just play for victory points. There are different ways that you can score points. Each of the factions has different ways that they score points, and you can play until last man standing or to a certain number of victory points, keeping track of your points here on this tracker. And you can play just a straight up skirmish game. However, when you're playing the scenarios, each faction involved in that scenario is going to have their own victory condition. In this instance, I was playing as the Vorpin. The Bomerk are going to be the auto enemy, the AI controlled enemy, as well as these Skarkags, these wolves here. So this is interesting in that I'm playing these guys, the Vorpin, and then there's going to be 2 AI controlled factions that are going to be competing against me, possibly competing against each other. Now the Vorpin have a number of different special rules, and they also have a setup. So the scenario is going to tell you how to set up your faction. In this case, in this map is 8x8. The map that comes with the full game when it is released is going to be, this is only 1 quadrant. So it's going to be 16x16. Part of me thinks that's cool, but I also like this small style, and I'm hoping that Robert thinks about including maybe more scenarios that only use a small part of the map, because this is really cool to have a really small little skirmish game. It's also going to be neat to have it be bigger to where you can play up to 4 players, but I appreciate this small scale of the way it is right now. And I believe even the box is going to be like twice as big, more of a square box. But in this instance, this tells me to place 3 of my Vorpin minions in these squares. The squares are going to be lettered and numbered. So we have A through H across the top and 1 through 8 across the side. It tells you to place the 2 wolves here and the Bomerk there. So the minions, the units, are marked by S's and D's. S stands for strength, D stands for defense, and that's going to tell you how many D6 you are going to roll when they're involved in combat. For instance, on this guy, if he was attacking, he would roll 1d6. If he was defending, he would roll 2d6. The combat is relatively simple. The attacker pays a certain number of action dice to attack. They roll their attack dice, if that was 2. The defender rolls their defense dice. Whoever has the highest number wins. If the attacker wins, they can, depending on the faction, they can kill the defender. They can take the defender prisoner. Some of them absorb the enemy to do other things. So there are different ways to deal with the combatants after the combat is over. If the defender wins, nothing happens, and you just keep on playing as normal. So for the Vorpin in this particular scenario, what I have to do is I have to board up the 2 entrances to this destroyed laboratory building by building walls. And the way you build a wall is you have to spend 1 ore and 2 movement dice. The way you get ore is you have to do a gathering action on spaces where there are rocks on the map. You can also gather wood in spaces where there are trees. You can gather water in spaces where there is water. And I believe that is all of the resources that I know about right now. You also have these spaces on the map that are marked with these red tokens and these blue tokens. The blue tokens represent items, and when a unit moves over one of those blue tokens, the blue token is removed from the map, and you get to draw an item from the item deck. And these items all do different things, and once again, Robert Lemon's art on here is pretty fantastic. So you can pick up an item. When you are on a red card token, you get to draw one of these action cards. And this is one area where I think the game is really going to become interesting, because these are really cool, different things, different powers, different abilities, different tactical things that you can do that your opponent cannot do, in addition to the powers that your faction already has. So I really like this idea of having a hand of cards, of items, and of action cards that you can surprise your opponent with. Now, there's also going to be somewhat of a legacy system in this game, whereas you go through a number of scenarios, you're going to be adding different item cards and different action cards to their respective decks. And that is somewhat similar, I think, to like Blackstone Fortress, and how it is somewhat of a legacy system. Your game will be changing as you are playing, but it's not a permanent system. You can easily reset it, and if you wanted to, you could just mix them all in at the beginning, probably. So that's kind of the setup of the scenario. Oh yeah, let's see, the victory conditions. So yeah, the Vorpin, they have to barricade the entrances. They have to defeat 2 enemies in combat and draw 4 cards, either action or item cards. The other faction, the Bowmark, their conditions for victory on this map would be to gather 6 resources and absorb them. As you absorb the resources, they grow in strength. And they have to defeat 2 enemies and draw 4 cards. The Vorpin, they can mutate into stronger versions of themselves. They can gather, and then they can build fences and walls. And then additionally, finally, each of the factions has an ancient, and this is like the Battle of the Ancients, has their god. And these were the offered in the Dark Venture as a expansion. And so each of the factions is going to have certain things that they need to do to summon their god, and then that god can come out onto the board as kind of like a super unit and do special things. So the game itself is relatively simple. The nuance comes in with the different powers that the factions have. It comes in with getting these action cards adding your items, and the different resources that you can gather. So what you're going to do is on your turn, you're going to roll the 6 action dice, and these have different faces. Skull faces, which are used to activate powers. You have orthogonal movement, where you can move 1 unit 2 spaces orthogonally. You have 1 orthogonal movement, where you can move 1 unit 1 space. And then you have some spaces that you can move diagonally. And so what you're going to do is you're going to roll your 6 action dice, and you're going to take your actions based on what you have rolled. So with these, you can move. You can, with a movement dice, die, you can activate combat. You can gather resources. There are other things you can do besides just movement. Another neat thing is if you rolled this, and let's say you didn't need these 2 skulls right now, but you might need them later. Each faction is going to start the game with a genetic memory card. And this is going to allow you to bank certain faces that you rolled to be used later. And you can store up to 3 faces on this genetic memory card. So if let's say I was going to be using those skulls for something at a later time, I could not use those now. I could spend those to buy 2 skull tokens, and then I could store those on my genetic memory card to be used at a later time. So I really like that. It gives you a little way to think about turns coming up, but also allows you to utilize utilize dice that you have rolled now later. That's a neat system. I like that. And so now I could spend my dice to move. I could move 1 diagonally. I can move there. I am in a rock space, so I could spend 1 movement dice to do some gathering. And here I can gather for 1 movement die or 2 skull dice. Roll a d6. If you roll a 2, 4, 6, you can gather 1 ore or wood. So that would be a 3. I wouldn't find anything. But let's say I rolled that 6. So then I could take an ore token and I could add that to my faction card. So that would help me later on to build that wall that I need to barricade myself in this destroyed laboratory, hoping to save myself from these wolves and these Bomark. And then you could take your other movement. Now you can have as many units stacked up on a space as you want. No limit there. And then after you've taken your turn, well, you have your 2 factions that you're fighting against now. The Bomark, they're going to be working through this auto enemy card here. Now I think Robert said that he was thinking about making this a deck of cards that you flip through, and I think I would prefer that. You're going to have some basic rules here that you're always going to follow with your auto enemies, and then some of the factions will have certain different things they're going to do in these steps. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to build up, they're going to try to get stronger, then they're going to move to attack, then they're going to go through combat, then you're going to have different kinds of combat resolution, then they're going to try to draw cards, then they're going to try to increase in number, then they're going to try to spawn, and then they're going to see if they invoke their ancient power. And so you're going to be working through that, causing these guys to move, and then this third faction here, the wolves, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to move, and eventually you're going to get into some combat. Hopefully you're going to power up your guys. So my Vorpin, to mutate, I can spend 2 move dice to increase strength or defense of any unit by 1. So I could have spent 2 of these d6 there to increase this S1D1 to, let's say, an S2D1. So you could replace that with an S2D1. And then let's say the next turn I did the same thing. I could replace this S2D1 with an S2D2, upgrading its defense that time. And then finally, you can spend 5 dice or 4 skull dice to mutate this S2D2 into an S3D3. So you will have to think pretty carefully about how you're going to be spending your movement, your action dice, how you're going to be upgrading your characters, how you're going to be gathering resources. You do want to make sure to get these items and to get into these action cards. Now you can have a hand of 5 cards at any time. So this could have been my hand here. Some of them you're going to have to use right away. Some of them you can wait till later. So this is the best battle plan. I can save until needed. I can discard this to move each of your units 2 orthogonally. This is a sprint, move any 1 unit 3. This is a faction bonus. So if I was playing the Vorpin get a +1 to combat roll. A unit loses 1 strength. And then this might be an item that I had. So even though the game itself is relatively simple in terms of rules, especially when maybe compared to other skirmish games, there are a number of small details that are constantly added to the mechanisms that create for some really interesting choices and decisions and situations that you're going to be faced with. I think this game is pretty interesting. So it's going to come with, like I said, a bigger map. It's going to come with 5 factions. It's going to come with 3 rule books. Now he is going to continue to publish his rule books in the small format used in the Dark Venture. He really likes that format. I wish they were a little bigger, like a trade paperback size. That would be my preferred size, but it is cool to have them in this small size. I'm hoping that he's able to convey enough information and some more examples, because while Dark Venture is a pretty simple game and the rules are okay, there are still some ambiguities, and I think a lot of that is just due to the fact that the rulebook is small and he's pretty limited in space. So I would hope that he's able to convey enough information in those rule books, because since this is a tactical skirmish game, it's much more competitive. The rules need to be, I think, more concise than in something like Dark Venture. They need to be, concrete. You're also going to get a small book of all of your scenarios. There's going to be a 24-page book of scenarios. And there's also going to be a 24, I think, page book detailing in detail all of the different factions, maybe some more details about their powers, how to use them, and possibly how to play them. Because I think they are different enough to where playing one or the other is going to make a pretty big difference. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how this final game shapes up. I really like the inclusion of the narrative scenarios for a solo skirmish style game. That makes me way more interested than I would be normally. And it's also a really cool thing that this game takes place in such an interesting setting, an interesting world with this bold, unique art that is really unlike anything else out there. So, all right, guys, well, hope you enjoyed taking a look at Battle of the Ancients. I believe that's going to be hitting Kickstarter the last of October or the 1st of November. So if this looks interesting to you, check it out. And we will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.